Converters and multi-bindings and any kind of complex XAML can be so annoying when setting up triggers, but it doesn't have to be that way. So for example, I have this very simple Maui application here, and on our view model, we just have a property for our score, and on our view, we can set our score through this entry, and then we give some feedback on the score. And as we can see here, we're using converters, multi-triggers, etc. Let's actually run this and see how it looks. Okay, so we can type in our score. We can see based on this score, we get a nice job feedback. If we drop it down, we get some more negative feedback. And then somewhere in the middle, we get some medium okay feedback. And again, most of our logic is in the view here. So our XAML is kind of intense. We're using a converter to see if our score is above 75. Then we show the good logic. Then we do the same kind of thing for the bad logic with a whole separate converter. And then we even have this multi-trigger here, pretty complicated, that uses two converters to see if our value is between two numbers. So a lot of complexity and logic in our XAML, which might not be a big deal for this simple example, but for a more complex example, this could easily grow out of control, especially because XAML is not really a programming language, and we're trying to apply all of this logic here. We need to manually create all of these converters. It's quite bloaty. So it'd be nice if we could power this kind of logic with a programming language such as C#. And realistically, this is exactly what we have our view model for. So our view model is a model for our view. So we can use it to execute some of this complex logic that we currently have in our view. So for example, instead of using this binding to just our score and then going through a converter in our XAML, we could put a property on our view model for maybe is good that checks if our score is above the threshold that we're currently checking in our view. So above 75 means our score is good. And now we can simply bind to this property from our XAML. So instead of needing this converter and the converter parameter, any kind of converter stuff, we can just check if our score is good and apply the good styles. And then while we're here, same kind of thing for the bad styles. We could have an is bad property. There we go. That checks if our score is less than 25. So let's add that logic. And then we can bind to it. So instead of converters, we just bind to is bad. And then finally, we can do the same kind of thing for the medium styles that we apply. I guess you could also keep the multi-trigger and have bindings to is good and is bad and check if they're both false to calculate these medium styles. But is a multi-trigger really the best approach here? In my opinion, probably not, just because I think multi-triggers can get complex and they take up a lot of space in the XAML. I think in this scenario, we can have the same kind of thing. We can move it to our view model. So we could have an is medium property, and we could check if the score is between 25 and 75 explicitly here, but actually we can just check if the score is not good and the score is not bad, then indeed it would be medium. So let's go ahead and apply this. So we don't need the multi-trigger anymore. Let's delete the XAML. That's always fun. And we want a binding here against is medium. And when it's true, we apply the medium styles. Okay, and last thing, because I'm pretty sure this isn't going to work, and that's because, for clarity, I am using the MVVM community toolkit here. So this decorator turns this field into a property that raises iNotifyPropertyChanged. I have a whole video on the MVVM toolkit. That'll link if you want to learn more about this. But basically, whenever this score property changes, we also need to raise iNotifyPropertyChanged for all of these other dependent properties as well. So to do that very easy with the toolkit, we can just add more decorators. So notify property changed for, and then pass in the property name. So we want to notify the is good property, the is medium property, and the is bad property. So now again, whenever our score property changes, we're going to raise iNotifyPropertyChanged for all of the dependent properties, which is going to update our UI and rerun or retrigger these bindings. So now, moment of truth, let's make this a bad score. There we go. Let's make this a medium score, and perfect. Our bindings are still working. We just have much less XAML here, much simpler XAML. We actually don't even need these converters over here anymore. We can delete those, goodbye. And all of our logic has moved into our view model. So personally, I love this approach. No XAML explosions, much simpler XAML, no dealing with converters or multi-bindings. It's actually easier to debug as well, which is nice. And of course, there is still places where converters and multi-bindings are useful. But for the most part, try leveraging view models for this kind of logic in your own application instead of writing a bunch of XAML.